Welcome back to the Titans of Today podcast, everybody. This is Jacob Vandersteen, episode 37. We have Dr. Robert Rady. Did I say that correctly?
Very right. Very good.
Wonderful. Well, happy to have you on the show, Doctor. Just so everybody is aware, Dr. Robert is a extremely accomplished entrepreneur, started a consulting firm for consumer packaged goods that ended up contributing up to, it was $3.3 billion. And I'm sure it's far more now. Right, you're behind and innovated some extremely impressive consumer products, and so in this interview, I want to really tap your expertise in some of those things, but also what you're presently doing and what you're looking like moving forward. So, thank you for joining me on the show here.
Well, thank you for the invitation, Jacob. I'm really happy to be here and try to bring some value to your audience. And let's see how this conversation you and I are going to have this morning can bring some of that value.
Certainly. And if we let's look at where you are today and work backwards a little bit. What is this integral advantage and how did this come about? Was it a culmination of your previous experiences all flowing together, and educate us a bit on that?
Interesting, Jacob, because many times we hear people that as they progress in their career, they talk about, in my previous life. And I don't believe there is a previous life. Everything is a continuum. Any career that develops over a period of time as is a blocks, right? One block informs the other. And so wherever we are in a industry, for example, whatever experience we accumulate there, then we bring into the next one if we make a shift in our career. Integral Advantage is really a continuum of what my career has been, and my partner in Integral Advantage, we shared much of the experience both in consumer product development and then in this space of executive education. So the point of Integral Advantage is really the convergence of a life of experience that brought me to understand from my consumer product strategy days what actually impacts organization to either be successful or to actually shoot themselves on the foot by not pursuing an opportunity. And as I was in that space, I unfortunately seen many instances where the misalignment in organization end up costing that organization a great opportunity in the market by either not pursuing an opportunity was in front of them or pursuing an opportunity just because there was a noise, but there was not really a signal from the market. They would pursue an opportunity because there was a noise and it was following the noise instead of the signal. So that is really Integral Advantage is not a standalone, it's a convergence and aggregation of all experiences that we have accumulated over 30 years.
And going back all the way to the beginning, you started very young, right? This firm. I mean, you were what, 27, was it? Or
no, I was younger than that. And I always say, yeah, I formed at the time, I really was in love with a book titled The Fifth Discipline, the first edition of the
That's phenomenal. Discipline. I just mentioned that in a previous podcast, by the way. So yeah, continue.
And I like the name so much, systems thinking. I love this so much. I call my consumer product agency Radi Systems. And everybody was immediately confused because they thought we were a computer company. I didn't realize that, that's how I learned how language was important. But I formed it when I was 22 years old. And at the beginning, we were working with organization manufacturers. At that time, manufacturing was still in the United States. So I'm really dating myself here. And we were working with the first client actually was electromechanical imagineering in Pacoima, California. And we designed a wide array of CCTV enclosures. So that was my introductions at 22. I find myself with a sizable clients, had a tremendous clientele from all the major retailers and anyone that needed security cameras at the time were becoming a thing to have. So that is really the way it started. It started with a client and then it expanded, as you keep, you really don't realize at that, I didn't realize at the time, but what I was doing, I wasn't really scaling my business. I was scaling the value that my business was generating and therefore it was valued that other organization found reliable, and I became a little bit the go-to guy for certain things in the convergence of consumer product, the strategy, in the ability to manufacture that product in a way that was effective and could really reach the market in reasonable amount of time. So that's really what started it all. My influence on that comes from my family. My father and my grandfather. My grandfather actually was the founder of Radi water heaters in North Italy. That is then became Ream Radi. So we merged with the American forces, and my father continued until his death as CEO of that organization. So the production, the design, production of water heaters, the technology that they developed at the time was not only ahead of its time, but was really innovative in the manufacturing process, in the insulation. They were using materials that were actually making the manufacturers nervous about the use of their material for those purposes, and they proved out the tremendous concept. So I always be curious. I always wanted to do something in that field, but I wanted to do it on my own terms. And that was the right start of Radi Systems. Then promptly became Radi Design Incorporated, when I understood that nobody knew what a Radi system was, and they didn't want to be confused with a computer manufacturer. So that is the inception, pun intended, of my career, of my starting as an entrepreneur.
And you mentioned the word inception there. So for those who don't know, one of the terms that Dr. Robert has coined is the Inception Mindset, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm sure everyone has in their mind, the movie Inception and the planting of an idea and everything of that nature. How related is it to that, and what really is the Inception Mindset?
It is not. Thank you, Jacob, for that question. I've never been asked that question. And finally, I get to air my grievances, right? In the sense that I thought that by now the movie wasn't really that part of the lingo anymore, right? And so to me, that movie Inception has nothing to do with the book itself or the term Inception Mindset. But of course, now that as people search for Inception Mindset, they get bombarded also with reference to the movie. To me, it's not really a question of planting ideas and, the reality of not of that. That was great entertainment, by the way, in all a great movie. I'm actually a fan of the movie. But to me, Inception Mindset came as I continue in the space of leadership development, and really is leadership in organizational effectiveness development. Effectiveness is not efficiency. Oftentimes we use the two words, interdependently, or we use it, we can use one for the other, but like they're synonymous, but they're not. And so to me, an effective leader is someone that is able to see what's coming down the pipeline in a fairly objective way. It's about Inception Mindset. It's about the holistic cognitive ability that allows individuals to perceive the complexity of our environment for what they are. They are a constellation, an aggregation of new beginnings. Hence, Inception. Inception, by definition, is the beginning of something. An effective leader is able to tune in what is the signal that this new inception point the inception point are providing. So it's really the ability to see what is coming down, this is new and this is new. The two may even merge into yet another point of inception. They may be interconnected. For example, you see what is the emergence now, right? In 2023, we've seen now AI as a possibility. It's not science fiction anymore. It's really something that you can interact. And oftentimes people say, how is going to destroy jobs, for example. And my question is like, okay, perhaps, but let's slow down here a second. Is AI helping us to do things that we already have someone doing it? Or is AI allowing and helping us doing things that we weren't doing? I see quite a bit in our environment. It is helpful in doing things that we didn't have the time to do. And so either we had to hire more, and then, sometimes you don't get the results that you need, or you can facilitate. So AI to me right now is, as an inception point, is a facilitator. Is not a substitution yet. And then again, we will have to see what the new point of inception will come down. But that is really the ability for us to see this new point of inception, how they interact with each other, how they merge, how they evolve, right? And so that we can impact our entire society. We can operate, adapt, and even transform. And it's all about innovation. And innovation is not really only about designing the new product, designing the gadget. Innovation entices, you can innovate systems, procedures, programs, right? Services. So, innovation really is well encompassing, in particular when it's done strategically.
I really like to tap your understanding because you're on the Chicago Board of Psychology. Is that correct? Or it's
I graduated from the Chicago School with a PhD in organizational leadership. I did serve as a faculty until 2019. However, as business has increased, the demand of my time has increased. I had to give that position up. I had to, quote unquote, retire from that, for lack of a better word, because I did really love to work with doctoral students. But yeah, I have a connection to that.
deep understanding of psychology is what I want to build the foreground here for as we go into these next.
There is definitely a connection. Let me put it this way. I define myself as a pragmatic constructivist from the perspective of academic research and academic writing. I do appreciate the elegance of ideas, how you need to construct an understanding, a meaning making of what's going in society. But at the same time, I love when it is implementable, is practical. So that is my what is called my epistemology. So yes, psychology as a foundation. In particular, if you ask me, well, in leadership, what schools do you identify the most with? That would be behavioral leadership. Behavioral. So yes, the psychology component is interconnected with my business, with the business and organizational methodology that I support.
The real world understanding, right? The practical application.
Absolutely.
So what I want to look at here, because you mentioned these words, efficiency, effectiveness, and then we're talking about leadership, and obviously that's really what you do, right? Leadership, training and development and whatnot. So I've found, and I found in my own experience, right? Efficiency and effectiveness. You're very right. Effectiveness does not simply come from efficiency, but there are in many domains where efficiency, if we rephrase the term instead of just being, efficiently able or able to efficiently perform a specific action, and we add volume to that, and we look at, broader efficiency within a given day, effectiveness can come from this volume is what I'm getting at in many domains. But I don't think that leadership is one of them. For example, you don't add on more leadership. There's no quantity, you're just more expressive, more talkative, or what have you, more enforcing, trying to get people to do things. That's not how leadership as a domain works. So are there other domains that you see in business that are important for people to understand where, let's say I want to make a lot of content, usually in the world of content, and this is studied many, many times over, people in practical use, people have used literally just creating more content to go and get millions of followers and, quality follows, whatnot. But again, in leadership, it's not really the case. So tell me about your experience with that, how we can better understand the domain of leadership.
A couple of things. Number one, to me, my point is not that it's only about either being efficient or effective. My point is that we cannot use the two interchangeably to define one and the other. We have to look at it, how distinct they are. For example, efficiency comes from, for example, the use of resources and maximize the use of resources. However, by maximizing the use of resources, you may create unintentionally, unforeseen consequences. For example, if you want to be more efficient with your workforce and you demand more for a period of time, you will get more. But over time, you will also see a decay. People will leave. People will start feeling that the pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So those are where we gonna go with efficiency. You're totally correct, though. In the area of leadership, it's all about being effective, because it is yes, and it is yes, using the resources appropriately to go toward the task, to be able to achieve, hold people accountable, achieve our strategic intent, etc. But it's also, and that is where the leadership, the behavioral school comes into play, it's also toward people. And so when we look at leading, you always lead people and you manage tasks, resources, finances, and things of the nature. But the job has always been leading people. And so if you want to lead change or leading through change, you have to combine to find a convergence point between behaviors toward people and behaviors toward the task.
Very, very informative there. One example is, let's say, cold calls. So if you're making cold calls, and you can be really good at making a lot of calls, but if you're talking to the wrong people, if you're calling the wrong thing, you're not going to be effective.
Very good. Very good. Exactly. That's one time I remember I was in an MBA class at Pepperdine. I was a student at that time, and we had a case study in front of us. And my conclusion was that this organization that was presented in the case was very effective at making a product that no one wanted to buy. So certainly they were very effective and very good at making a product that has done its time. That the market wasn't responding anymore to it. So they were no longer effective, but they were really efficient at making a product that nobody wanted. To your point about the content, right? Content creation, to me, is like when you talk about leadership, in leadership development, my job is to facilitate the connection between content and context. So that's why I talk about contextualizable. I talk about the contextual art and science of leading in a permanently complex world, because context, what is the context in which you operate? You create content for the context. And so this content creation, in particular with the AI, we've seen a tremendous increase in content creation. But what is the context and what is the value that is bringing in the context, right? To see AI video generated of firefighters saving a bear in the Palisades fire, which is AI generated, and see 5,000, a million likes to it. What is really generating in value? Because to me, at the end of the day, Jacob, it is really a success is a byproduct of generating value for others. And given that on Monday, we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, I would like to say that one of the most impactful quotes in my career, my life, is a quote from Martin Luther King. And he says the following: life most pressing, and the question is, what are you doing for others? I know I messed it up, but it's also early here. So the idea here is life most pressing question is, what are you doing for others, right? It's right in the immediate point. What are you creating for others? In this podcast, are we going to create some value for others? And that is really what purpose is in life. Can I create values for others? What impact can I have for others? That is really then the context of the content you create.
And does this also apply to the way that guide leaders and have guided leaders to create effective consumer products? Because, if you start with that question, like you're talking about, how are we creating value for this person, rather than oftentimes like a large corporation may look and say, okay, here's all of our customer base. Here's what this type might need. These people might need this product. They might need this product. Instead of you can go on a long shoot of just
Right.
thinking about all the stuff that seems smart, but in reality, if you're not answering that simple, what value are we creating for this person? You may err. Or what are some of the victories and successes that you've seen in your career with consumer products in particular? Because I know it's hard. A lot of people look from the investor world and whatnot, look at consumer products as a very difficult thing to do effectively, because it's not a B2B sale, right?
Well, it is more that there may be some B&B. Some products are indeed for design and built by a manufacturer for another business, for use of creating. Yet it could be a machinery, it could be anything in that. When we look at consumer product, obviously you're going directly and making your case to the consumer that whatever you provide as a product or services will enhance their life. It's really something that is intersecting a need that they have. That is really what you do. When you design a product, you have to think in terms about really skating where the puck is going, right? And being able to intersect at the moment, because it takes sometimes a year or two to bring a product to market. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of risk that is involved in creating a new product. That is really where you start. Your cash burning rate starts there in the development of the product. And there's a lot of uncertainty that has to be guided through when you got to from concept to even the first prototype, to see where you are, right? To see are we ready to do some consumer focus group, for example, right? And that is it's a free fall. There's no really guarantee in that period between conception to all the way to a focus group, for example. Then you start getting clarity. In every steps of the way, if you really incubate a product, you go through the phases of staying in incubation. You can lower your cost, increase the value, learn from the process, and then you can learn incrementally from the focus group, from the first launch, et cetera, how you bring a product to market. And so the idea of a product has to always be, what value will the consumer see in that unique value, the value proposition? That's what we call a unique value proposition. What is your product going to do that everything I have in my home it doesn't do now? Why is it going to do it better? It's going to have to look the part, of course, coming from being classically trained as an industrial designer. I always appreciated the look, but also look and function have to go together, because that's what creates value.
Mm-hmm. And what about the failures? So it seems like the success that followed a very distinct process of having a thesis and expanding on it, testing it, validating it, iterating.
The failure part of innovation, right? There's really no, in innovation, failure is always an option, right? Failure is always an option, because at what point are you failing? Are you failing in the moment you launch the product, or are you failing in realizing that the product may be a not yet product? It may be 3-4 years ahead of its time, and therefore you got to slow down to speed up. Or is it a question of that we have kind of bypassed some of the steps that needed to be taken before we went from incubation into propagation of that concept, and that where we start cutting steel, meaning we made a mold for it. That's tremendous amount of cost. Even today, it was. I've been out of the consumer product strategy game for over 10 years, and one thing I have to tell you, that the cost of making a mold did not decrease, even with the technology. Steel, with inflation, costs a lot of money. So this you have you failed at that point, or have you failed somewhere in between where you were able to recover? And let me give you the difference in this. When this year, next month, is going to be 20 years of the launch of the Neutrogena microdermabrasion that I designed for them. And it's kind of been with me in the last couple of months. It's like, my goodness, 20 years, the commercial that was launched in February 25. The late Kelly Preston was the spokesperson. It was beautiful. That was a very successful product. It was a successful launch. And during the product, the development of the product, we have very, very tight timeline. And we were working with the parent company, Johnson & Johnson. Their engineering group were fantastic. We had Michael McNamara, CEO of Neutrogena, and Jen Hall, president of Neutrogena, fantastic lead. And, hey, we want to get this done, aligning resources. But at the same time, we had a very tight timeline. So we had alignment, but we had not the luxury of time. As I was developing the product, there was one item that I didn't know. It was unknown because we were doing engineering design concurrently. And it was the position of this micro-orbits motor that goes into these devices. And the weight it is different, right? It depends how you install it, right? And we didn't have a clear understanding how the bracket was going to work until the engineers were able to finish their portion. And so I created a single point of failure, not knowing. I say, this is what I don't know. So let me create a single point of failure. And the unit required to be standing up in a stand. And so I created all the failure. I brought it in the bottom part of the stand. This is the only thing that could go wrong. There was no electronics in there. It was just a piece of plastic. Sure enough, when the final prototype come together, we had an issue. And I remember getting a call. It was late in the evening. The good folks, the engineers were at the manufacturers in Hong Kong, in China, and they say, hey, we have a problem. And it didn't come as a surprise. I knew we could have had the problem. I said, gentlemen, you had a long journey getting there. Go to sleep. Let me work with the manufacturers. And we fixed the problem in about half a day. I stayed up. It was day over there. That was great to be in two different time zones. And by the time the engineer returned, the problem was fixed. So I did consciously move all my risk in a single part that I knew that could be addressed before, taking the bigger risk, which is cutting steel.
And, along that, I think one thing that I found informative is just the step-by-step approach to failure. You'll, of course, disidentify it as failure. You'll obviously admit and say, okay, that didn't go how I wanted. But that word and the way that people approach failure often is like a damning thing. So this thing breaks, it goes wrong, and they go into this negative spiral. Instead of what you approached is, okay, so where did I go wrong? Why did I go wrong? Is it something I could have known? Is it something that where are the causes and the roots, and taking the appropriate action instead of dwelling?
So one of the things, Jacob, is that you can never dissipate risk. Risk is part of everything. And when we talk about risk, you can mitigate risk. And you mitigate risk with having the foresight. You develop foresight. What's coming down the pipeline? Are we intersecting the market? Are we too early to the market? Are we too late? Are we speaking right now a language that perhaps is not mainstream yet? And therefore, do we want to change our message, or do we want to stick it out? It may take a year for us to actually connect with the audience. So do we have that time, right? So that is really how you mitigate risk. There's not a formula to say zero risk. There's not such a thing. Risk is everywhere because we cannot see everything, right? We cannot see everything. That is why even in complexity, we live in a complex world, but we say, well, we do live in unprecedented complexity. Absolutely. But complexity has been part of the human experience. When things stop becoming being or complex, when we figure it out, you figure something out, right? And it came to me early in my life. While I was, during summertime, my family had a vineyard, and so during summer, it was either working for the family on the vineyard for free, or go get a job, right? So that you can make some money. Because at home, it was like, you have everything here. You're already paid, right?
Mhm.
So I went to get myself a job as in hotel about 150 miles from home in the Italian Alps. And in this hotel, I worked in the kitchen. And I had the chef. The chef was the son of the owner, which, is questionable in itself. But one time I go down and I couldn't open the walk-in refrigerator, right? And this is a big thing to be able to access that. And there was something wrong with the mechanisms. I ran up, I said, Peter, I cannot get in. And he looks at me and immediately goes like, do what the Americans do. I'm like, oh, okay. And then I start walking away. And then I take a few steps, I wait. Peter, what do the Americans do? He say, they figure it out. And so I'm like, okay. So basically say, figure it out. Yeah, it may be a complex issue, but it's stop being complex in the moment you figure it out. And so I went down and got some tools and finally figured it out. I got in, right? And make sure it didn't close out so that we could access it the rest of the day. But that to me was a point as like, it stopped being complex in the moment you figure it out. So a lot of the things that we have now that we identify as complex, eventually the complexity as a cycle. It would become complicated. It will become something that we're going to develop best practices, right? Right now, we can only embrace emerging practices to operate in complexity. But eventually, we will figure it out where we gonna move it in a different domain and become more accessible. And maybe, indeed, AI may even help that process in figuring it out.
Mm. You mentioned earlier about scaling value and how that's really the key area of focus first. When you're
Yes.
working with these large corporations, there's really two things I'd like to understand here. Is one is around how, because I saw and I read that your firm was generating, over $100 million of annual revenue. Is that correct?
No, for us, for the clients.
For the clients. Okay.
I wish we got that. No, we were generating through our services, our product, our consulting. We were able to calculate some of the companies were publicly traded, so it was easier to look at the 10K or and figure out where the value was generated for which product. Others were just disclosed to us. So in aggregation, we figured out what we had generated over time. For example, the microdermabrasion, the device that we designed for Neutrogena, was on the market for 17 years. Same design, same everything, right? And that really speaks about value generation, because a good product, you have a 3 to 5 years life cycle. You look at Apple. Apple is always on the forefront of what's next in our line, right? Because there's a life cycle in any product. In that particular one, the fact that it could have been on the market for so long, it speaks to the value that was generated. And, as you said, over time, what is generated in revenue. So I wish we could have generated 100 million a year for our organization, or we generated for the client. So that's part of our value creation. Did we get paid well? Yes, I cannot complain about that.
Right. And that's kind of what I was getting at, is just the way that you approach, especially with a design, right? It's an IP. I mean, were you getting a percentage, or how did that?
Sometimes, as a good economist would say, it depends.
Yeah.
There are many things. There were clients that would be more than happy to pay a little bit more, and you would finish your work, and then they will see you, send you a Christmas card, and you will keep a good relationship, but they didn't have to talk to you because they owe you more money. This would say, okay, we have, share in the risk with us, and then you share in the reward. Some of those worked well. I think that some of the product we designed, they were part of the Wolfgang Puck brand, did well in generating some of that income, or some inventors that came to us and they had maybe a name in the industry, and so we participated, we risked with them. So yeah, there was an hybrid in generating income, because at the end of the day, you got to have income to have a business.
Yeah. And this is what I asked that question, is because for those that are looking, let's say, that are younger and they're getting into the market, and to tap your experience of the proper way to get compensated, when you are innovating and you're creating something, right? There's such a broad range of ways that you can, some depending on the firm or the approach, equity or revenue share or profit, or
Absolutely.
your salaries, your consulting fees. And I just think that's something that is not talked about a lot, and so over the broad scale of your career, would you say that you were happier and it was more beneficial when you did have some of that share in the risk and there was some profit share on the other side? I mean, where did you get your team get your best outcome, and how did you rally people around that when it was potentially more performance driven versus, the safety and security that comes with that good,
Yeah.
solid check? Because I think that's part of the entrepreneurial dance is, how exactly you're getting compensated on the upsides and everything that goes along with that. There's a lot to it.
That's a great question. And, it is not different than also when we put out something that is content like a book. You take all the risk up front. And if you have created value, you get some sales, you get royalties, etc. But I would like to say that first, whenever I took the risk, I didn't expect those people that were around me and were my collaborators and were working with me to take the risk with me. So if I take the risk, no money up front, I would have, I would pay those around me so that they would make whole at the same time. So there was not that, gee, what about if this goes wrong? They would work as with peace of mind and in serenity any other day. So that was important. And if somebody had to have the jitters, well, the jitters were mine to have, right? Because I made the decision, and my partner. So I made the decision to go and do that. And of course, I mean, there are moments that you put in everything, the numbers are good, and then there's something with the organization. For example, if you are trying to license something, it gets shut down. And it could be for an array of issues. Revenues for them are not there. They're not willing to go, even if they get the first phase done and you provide a prototype and all that. That's called the world of licensing, for example, right? You may have a license agreement, but it stops on sometimes. You don't get all the way to the finish line. And so that's part two. You have to ask yourself, am I okay with it? I'm okay if that I took the risk, right? But if you don't take the risk, you will never know. You want to take calculated risk, who I'm working with, what is the brand I'm working with, what is going to bring me even in a worst case scenario. Am I going to learn from this? What do I want to learn from this experience? There have been companies that we work with, in particular in the direct response market. Back then, it was still a viable venue to sell products, the infomercial, for example, right? And we did take the risk, and it did not go well. But throughout the thing, is like I was keep asking myself, what do I want to learn from this, right? Even if everything goes wrong, what am I going to learn? Learn some very good lessons, right? Lessons that I couldn't have gone to learn and get a degree in that lesson that I learned. So risk has many facets, right? And you have to be able to accept that you roll the dice based on the probability that you have. You've done your homework. You see that is there. The market is there. You may intersect the market. At the point you roll the dice, you should evaluate your performance at that point, because a lot of that happens afterward. Is things that are totally out of your control, totally out of your control. And that is where it speaks also to the complexity of our world, where you think you are in control. Well, not really. It is a lot of other things that has to happen in a line for your product to be successful in the market.
And I think there's a good amount of information and things, perspectives out there in the world that have hit my generation. That is, you are responsible for everything, and it's like, hey, you're responsible for everything. If it doesn't work, it's on you, and you just need to work harder or whatever variety of things. That probably isn't as, supportive or effective, because like you mentioned, you have to allow failure, right? The greatest organizations do allow points of failure so that you learn from it. And, it's a different culture around failure versus this kind of, it did.
Well, let me tell you a little story about failure. One time I was at the Bolger Center and I was facilitating a course for the Air Force. These were senior executive civilian within the U.S. Air Force. And as I was facilitating, this name keeps coming up. Dr. Will Roper, Dr. Will Roper, all the participants, Dr. Will Roper. I had no clue of Dr. Roper was. So at the lunchtime, I go to, everybody goes to lunch, immediately on the computer, and Dr. Will Roper, Assistant Secretary for Acquisition and Purchases, and I found a few videos of him on YouTube, and I'm like, no wonder these people speak so highly of Dr. Roper, because he had really brought this idea of that if there is failure, and this is the one that said the word, you get my validation at the moment you roll the dice. Because if everything was a good fit, everything you've done, it was correct, you checked all your boxes, and you roll the dice, a lot of things may not go well. And he said, I benefited in being part of this risk taking. So we'd like to talk about risk taking because it worked for us. But there's a level of hypocrisy there because it doesn't work all the time. We benefited from it, but it doesn't work for everybody. So the important part it would celebrate is the learning that took place in something that tried, maybe a small experiment, did not work out, but we learned something here, and then here in my validation. And he would have an event and celebrate what the risk that was taken and the outcome that was generated from it. And that's how you move an organization forward when you have potential adversary out there that they will risk everything, right? They will risk more than you do. They're willing to risk more than you do, right? They're willing to invest more in the core than you are willing to invest. And so you got to accept that it's going to be a risk, and that you got to accept that it's going to be, as I said before, in innovation, failure is always an option, right? And so you have to appreciate that. The question is, what are you going to learn from it? So as a young person, no, you're responsible for what you're responsible for, right? In a sense, I know it's a simple argument, but you cannot control everything. There are opportunities that are afforded to a younger generation that I sometimes don't understand. They're being fortune generated out of YouTube. I mean, imagine that I'm 53 right now, and in my 20s, 33 years ago, going to my late mother now and say, Mom, I'm going to be a YouTuber. Just imagine what she would have thought of me, and there was no YouTube at the time. But again, look at what has been a progress has generated even professions that YouTubers is an outlier because not everybody makes their fortune on YouTube. But you can see what the technology has done for us, how it opened up opportunity. Risky, yes, but look at the cost of that risk. At time, you also have to look how technology is helping you, mitigate the risk. And in particular, the investment, the monetary investment that has to be made, you can control that cost because of technology. So something that before today, I was reading an article that there was a projection that by 2035, so roughly or 10 years from now, that most things would cost much less because of AI. And so you will have, more discretionary income. Well, is that argument? Perhaps, it's part of the dialogue that we need to have. What is going to do to that? But the cost right now of trying something because of technology, trying to put out a message, trying to put out a service is much lower. The cost of entry, the barrier of entry from a cost perspective. What you have to do as a young person, you have to make sure that you are objective. You have to fall in love with what you want to do, and at the same time, be objective that those that you're going to bring it to the market to, they might not respond the same. They might have this same enthusiasm that you have. And so as you launch it, you then have to, shepherd the whole concept through those channels.
And what emerges to me, and there's some other psychological parts or psychological studies I'll bring up, but what emerges is, this view on that simple point right there. What is the cost of trying this? And looking at that as it is. So if it's calling a person, pitching this investor or whatever, these actions that we do to get, to our pitching a new client or going through sales and making sure to push through objections and, just these everyday things that people go through as entrepreneurs, or even what is the cost of going and trying to go to the gym or start running or what have you. It's like a lot of times in our day-to-day life, the cost is emotional. It's this emotional, what if this person says that? What if this person looks at me the wrong way? Or, what have you, if someone's just getting started to go to the gym and they're uncomfortable, right? There's these emotional costs. And then it's when we can look at that to the contrary and say, well, you can analyze the cost of what it is to try it. But then what about not trying it? What is the cost of it? That's what we never really look at. When we get to that, we go, shoot, if I don't try this, if I don't try something that's going to make me healthier, I'm going to be screwed. I'm actually going to have to pay financially for this doctor or that thing or that treatment, So I think that's a great framework that emerges.
And very good, Jacob. And that is really a way between stimulus and response. There is a space. Viktor Frankl, right? From the Stoicism, if you want to see psychology, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And then we have to make meaning of what's taking place. That's Viktor Frankl, but also the philosophy, the Stoic line of philosophy that we have no control of what happens to us, but we can only control our response. And so in the moment we have this stimulus, it's risky, right? We have to ask ourselves, that is really very good way to pull the emergency brake and say, wait a second, what is the cost of not doing it? And I can give an example. When I was sitting on a couch of a friend that was going through a executive MBA at Pepperdine, and she told me, well, this is the cost of tuition. I'm like, whoa, not going to happen. 2 months later, I was in the program because then I started asking myself, what is the cost of not doing it, right? And sure, for that money, I could have gone and get a membership at the Riviera Club in Pacific Palisades, but at the time, the reality is that I wouldn't have had the reframing that I had during the program. Matter of fact, that was probably one of the best investments I ever made, because the first module of the entire MBA program at Pepperdine was focused. When I saw it on the curriculum, I was like, oh my God, please, I just hope it's going to go fast those 3-4 months. And it was organizational behavior. And I thought, oh my gosh, God, help me get through that as quickly as I can, because it sounds like not something practical. And he opened my eyes to a new world so much that I decided right then that I wanted to pursue a PhD on the subject matter, because I saw in the moment all those things, there's misalignment that I experienced in my life, how I facilitated things happening in organization. One time I would not mention the name of the client, but fairly large manufacturers of houseware. Okay, so let me, and I always thought that the CEO wanted me on board because of my proudness and the name I created myself in the consumer product strategy world. It hit me later on, as we have really they produced probably a quarter of what I designed for them, that what he was using me for, he was using me as a conduit between his VP of business development and his VP of marketing. It seems like when I was present, the two could align. And so I started looking at this idea of facilitating which I I was doing it, but I didn't even know what the heck I was doing, right? So that opened up. And so going back to the investment, what would have been the cost for me now if I haven't taken that investment, made that substantial investment in that program? It wouldn't have opened up, and it wouldn't have given me the language that then I was able to develop and bring it into my next round of studies and start coming out with integration of concept. I'm somebody that looks at everybody. I appreciate everybody's point of view. There've got to be some truth in all of it. And then I integrate it. So the integral advantage that, you integrate perspective, you integrate methodology, you integrate point of view, and then you have an advantage which transcends competitive advantage, which is just a period of time. You can have competitive advantage for a year, 6 months, but when you develop integral advantage, you have a much more wider and longer lifespan.
Mm. Now let's go deeper on the subject of that organizational change, organizational thinking, and everything like that. Particularly because you worked with large corporations, large enterprises. There's, as Bill Lau called it, he's going to be on the podcast here coming up sometime in the next month. He's the founder of SOSV, so very, very successful investor. He talks about that each organization has, or each institution in our lives has a covenant, and the covenant of the enterprise or the corporate world is trust. And so because really people, they don't want to risk that salary. They don't want to lose their job over trying something. And, it's a significant topic of startups or companies that want to sell and work with these large enterprises of, you're working with these people who have a different set of risk and reward than you do. So how did you manage that successfully and really approach, being a thought leader, because you're bringing these creative designs, these innovations to them with, the right metal to get them to really drive though as well, and maybe take some of those risks or be part of the thing you're creating?
So that's a great question, and I do agree with your future guest 100%. As a matter of fact, I have developed a framework called Entrusted Empowerment. And you do not get people to trust you or make people trust you. You earn their trust every day. And you don't get to empower anyone. We are not empowerment fairy. They go around with the little wand and here, you're empowered, you're empowered. A leader creates the condition for people to empower themselves. It's different. People empower themselves because you created a condition. So when we look at working with an organization, much of my work right now has to do with leveraging, again, that's why I say it's a continuum, my consumer product strategy experience, my experience in serving as an elected official and serving on a public agency board. It gives me a different perspective, not better perspective or better than anyone else, but it gives me yet a different perspective that somebody else may have, that I may have stayed in the field of academia throughout their career. Much respect for them, right? And not saying anything, but I have a little bit of integration of concept that I can bring to the table. And so when I work, for example, with some of my work is with federal agencies, which is work that I love. We often talk about the federal government just like some entity, but the reality is that there's so much intricacy and complexity in the federal government is not monolithic. Each department, each agency has their own dynamics and their own context, right? One of the things that I brought to the forefront is this ability to have been able to get the very essence of what's going on in an organization, in particular when I work with a single agency or a single entity, a single company. I can go in and I have developed this Entrusted Empowerment organizational assessment that is 33 items with 2 qualitative items. And we get so much clarity going in to identify what does the organization need to develop. Because if you don't have an understanding of that, so this assessment that we give a link is distributed to the members of the organization. We want to have the entire organization represented, not only the top brass. right? And then we can benchmark it against our research, see where you are on strategic clarity, execution clarity, operational clarity, and the interplay nodes that are part of this, which is contextual fairness, autonomy, and sustained competency. And so when we measure that, then we can see what is our entry point in creating a developmental path, a developmental way forward for that organization. Instead of going in and hear maybe the perception of their chief learning officer, that is one data point. So we go in, this assessment has been tremendous for us. It is a part of, we talk about it in the book, we talk about the methodology, we talk about each of the dimensions in interplay node. Why is that important? Well, first of all, it is a very strong assessment. All our constructs have a 0.7, above 0.7 in Cronbach alpha. So it has a strong internal validity and reliability. What we did find is the correlation of the entire framework with outcomes such as engagement, performance, and adaptability, which by adaptability will also mean innovation, right? So knowing that when we measure each of these constructs, we can see where we can help the organization first, right? And it's really a little bit of, a diagnosis, right? You would not go to a doctor, say, doctor, I have a headache and I need brain surgery. Just because I said it to the doctor, say, okay, maybe, but why don't we run this test first to see what is the cause? You're talking about a symptom. You're not talking about the problem. You don't know what the problem is. You're self-diagnosing yourself, and you're not really bringing any value to the table. So the doctor will say, well, let's run some tests first. And because what you say, a headache, it may be a symptom of many things, not something that need to be operated on. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we are bringing, the same methodology in a sense to really identify what are the entry points here in the organization. What can we do immediately? What are you already strong at that we can leverage to the things that need development, right? So it becomes much more holistic as an approach than say, hey, Robert, Dr. Rady, come in, give us a talk about conflict. Yep. Okay, I can do that, but is that really, why do you have conflict? Should we look at what are the dynamics there? That perhaps conflict is because there's a misunderstanding between two departments about what their synergistic outputs should be. What do we have to put out together? They know what they have to put out independently, but they don't know what the synergistic output has to be.
Right. And it's like, in the world of business, when I was just getting started, one of the things I found very compelling and interesting was that you can go and you can talk to someone and say, here's what we're going to do. Here's what I think you should do. And, what comes to mind as well with this is the Steve Jobs. Most people don't know what they want. You need to tell them what they want. But what's interesting about that, what I'm starting to realize here is to connect, to expand on this story, what I was saying, you agree with somebody in a sales call for your business, then you have to go write the agreement. All right. And when you're writing the agreement, you realize that, wait, there aren't just agreements that there are now templates, of course, but you have to customize that agreement to that particular person based off the things that you communicated and what you're going to do for them. Right.
Absolutely.
And when you do this, it helps so much because you get that clarity. You say, well, here's what's going to happen if this happens. We're not going to do this. We're going to make sure we do that. You're defining this covenant, this agreement. And so based off of what you're telling me, to really have success, you have to acknowledge the covenant that entity, whether it's a type of entity, or it's enterprises, or it's a specific entity, the covenant that entity has for itself. And when you're asking questions and when you're bringing out, rather than, directing in this case, you're building trust within that environment, within that enterprise. So, and I don't think that's often talked about. I think that normally, again, especially, let's say we're consultants, we want to come in and say, well, you don't know what you're doing in maybe in our demeanor and not specifically in words, but hey, you don't know what you're doing. That's why you brought me in. So I'm here to get this thing done. But in reality, that very much contrasts, the covenant of that experience or that trust. You need to build the trust by asking questions. And there's no disconnect, but continue. Go ahead.
No, Jacob, you're right on. Actually, I cannot add much to it. I would say, since by not doing what you are now saying, we have the tendency then to work off assumptions that are often the results of selected data. We look at for the data that confirms our bias. Confirmation bias is real, as it is implicit bias is real. And so it is part of our, I have the test, right? Every time I have a course and I have a very simple test that people take in order to find out if they have an implicit bias. And I call it the Radi test. It is one question: do you have a brain? If you have a brain, you have unconscious bias. If you don't have a brain, you don't. So only dead people don't have unconscious bias or implicit bias. So by not really seeking that clarity up front, as you have suggested, you allow for confirmation bias to take place, for conclusions to be reached without a proper, exploration, proper diagnosis. So as we reach conclusion, we have the tendency to take actions based on those conclusions. How we reached those conclusions was the fruit of the poisonous tree, because we did not look indeed objectively at the data. We did not look at what our beliefs are informing. What are we trying to confirm a bias that we already have, that this is that. And so we have to be careful with that, because we live, when we talk about complexity, we live in a world that is becoming, it is the yes and. It's really the improv. It is yes and. This is, and then this is. And one of the things I would highly recommend everyone that I've been working hard myself to eliminate, it is what it is. That is a dangerous use of language. Language is important. Neuroscience, neurolinguistic programming is a science. It's not a pseudoscience. It's a science. When we look at where the neuroscience come from, and this idea of neuroplasticity, how our brain can change, not a result of trauma, but as a result of experiences, decisions we make, choices we make, right? This was discovered by Santiago Ramon y Cajal, considered the father of neuroscience, in the 1920s, when there was no MRI, there was no CAT scan. It was on his own deductions that our brain changes structure, that hence the name neuroplasticity, based on the use of language. And Viktor Frankl talked about logotherapy, therapy, words. And so it is what it is. There is a moment in which you ingrain, I cannot do anything about that. It is what it is. I remove the it is. In this moment, it is. No, it is what it is. It is. And so I recognize objectively that there is a wall in front of me. And then when I recognize that barrier, their impediment, which it is, then I can develop strategy. I can develop a strategy, because what is strategy, after all? It's a way to find a way around an obstacle. You see a wall. In military strategy, you have a long wall, and you have a few choices. You blow up the wall. What are the consequences of that? You can take ladder and go over the wall. You can fly people over them. You see, you start looking then at how you're going to craft your strategy to get around what it is. But it is what it is means I cannot do anything about it. And it's not true. It's not true. This is really like oftentimes those that indeed create value, they go at it, right? They go at it. Thomas Jefferson said, I found 999 ways that light bulb ain't gonna work. Right? There was 1,000 that it did work. But I can tell you the other 999, no, don't do those. And it's really in each moment, it is, but we're going to find a way around.
Mm-hmm.
We
And
figure it out.
acknowledging that everything does pass as well. So it is, but it will change. It will change some way.
This past, this is gonna be. As a young, in my 20s, I always said that whenever I face something that difficult, I would say, in 2 months, this is gonna be in the past. Give me 60 days is not a long time. Just see yourself, project yourself out in 60 days from now, and you will see that this moment is like that would be in the past, right?
Right.
It's a way to build some emotional intelligence, of course, which as the underlying subject here is leadership. Definitely I don't know how much more research we need to show how emotionally intelligent leaders outperform those from a point of view of effectiveness. They are more, they outperform those that have not taken the time, made the choices to develop that emotional intelligence.
I think one of the strongest cognitive biases or confirmation biases that we have is towards ourself. When you talk about neurolinguistic programming, the perception, the self-identity, which is essential. Everyone needs and has, an identity, but it's often we get stuck in, to use the term right, it is what it is in terms of the self, and that our ability to have, the power to change that. And I always find that whenever I do, because I did your assessment, and the word inception is interesting here. What is the Myers-Briggs? That's another assessment. It's for those that I think really take ownership and responsibility of their mind and their ability to shape and influence their lives to be how they want to be, or influence their identity, which shapes their life. I always find those assessments interesting, is that they and really just questions in general, because questions, right, that's the ways that we build trust societally and culturally. But that, specific to that assessment, you're able to wake people up a little bit, and they can say, hey, for example, one of the questions was, I always respond positively to complex scenarios and discovering solutions. And when you wake yourself up a little bit, you go, at some points I have, at some points I haven't, but really my purposeful intention moving forward is to do it. And I can really, to do so, I would need to focus more on the opportunities where it did go really well, and learn from the ones where it didn't, and, project myself forward a little bit, right? That's how much does that play into your approach of organizational change? Because you have to, they're bringing it out of themselves, right?
Absolutely. And that is really what executive development is all about, to allow the individual to tap into the wisdom that is already there. To me, a good assessment, we own 3 assessments: the Inception Mindset inventory that we offer at no cost on our website, which you have taken, well, I understand, and the Integral Advantage in Compass, which is a 360 assessment that measures leadership branding of in emerging or in executive. And then we have the Entrusted Empowerment organizational assessment. Now, to me, a good assessment is always gives you a moment. First of all, it makes you think as you take it, right? Right there, it causes something in you. It makes you reflect. In the feedback we got when we launched the Inception Mindset inventory was always, it made me think. I'm like, good. That's because that's what Inception Mindset, the book, is not I hate the word self-help. It's not self-help. It is a thinking book, right? And it's looking at how to develop. This is the Inception Mindset. These are the fundamental of it, how we get on develop that. So an assessment is a moment in time. It's like, I always tell the participants in my courses, workshops, seminars, it's like a good assessment is just like going to a mall. You park your car, you go up the elevator. As you get up at the top of the elevator, there is always something at the top of the elevator. And it has a red dot, right? It is a map of the mall, and it has a red dot or whatever color says you are here. Now, that's what a good assessment says. Right now, on this construct, you're here. That's the red dot. Doesn't mean you cannot go to, well, if it's me, I'm going to look for Sis candy, right? At the store. I'm sorry, got to get some cis candy. So you look at the map and say, well, but I want to go to cis candy. I'm not here. It doesn't say the map that you cannot get there. It doesn't give you a path. You're going to figure it out. You're going to figure out how to go there now that you know where you are. And so that's really the usefulness of an assessment to reflect and see now in this moment, where am I? Doesn't mean that you're fixed, nothing like that. Inception mindset can be developed. And Inception mindset is developed across the four horizons, right? That I talk in the book. The horizon one is gaining clarity in complexity. It's really a way to embrace complexity using the CADE model that I propose in that, using the ability to look at complexity in a continuum, not only what we are experiencing now, but what humanity has experienced. You don't think that building the pyramid was a complex task? We know, we still scratching our head how they did it, right? Or creating the postal service, starting the first Olympic Games, right? They didn't have FaceTime to organize, right? So think about the level of complexity because it wasn't facilitated by technology. Then the second one is to have a clarity about your leadership brand and your leadership presence. How are you going to deploy yourself? Are you deploying yourself indeed the way you think you are? And so that is really you have to scan the environment, understand the impact that you have on others. The third horizon is understanding the organization, specifically in the context of the organization in which it operates. So there's that third. And the fourth horizon is to bring it all together. And that is where the magic is. And that's really the essence also of innovation. By bringing it together, you look at what's coming down the pipeline and you craft with foresight how you're going to approach it. And so you did not become reactive. You are really creating foresight to anticipate how these point interceptions going to merge, they're going to interact with each other, what they're going to bring. Because without challenges, there are not really opportunities. First, if you want to find a great opportunity, find a challenge. And then you will see an opportunity. Jacob, I'm very, very concerned when people say, let's go for the low-hanging fruit. I'm like, if there are low-hanging fruits, why not everybody else is going for it? Let me ask that first. And then let's see if indeed there are low-hanging fruits or they're just noises that eventually they're very, very short-lived value.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned, I think it's a great takeaway for people to be very aware of and start to use in their life is the Viktor Frankl quote where there's an impetus and there's a response, and in between that there's a space.
Yes.
So I think it's extremely important for people to observe in their own life.
Absolutely. In that, Jacob, everything that we do to develop ourselves, and I'm telling you as I'm telling myself, I'm not this supreme being evolved that has all the answers. I'm going through the struggle like everyone else, but I have had the gift or the ability or the opportunity, the blessing to have gone through some experiences that made me understand myself a little bit more so I could understand others, right? The more I understand myself, the more I can understand others. So one of the aspects of being reactive or versus crafting, right? Something can happen to me, I can react in the moment, which I still do, less than when I was younger, because I made some concerned effort to develop myself. But in the moment, as something happens, pulling in, and that's what I do in my courses, give techniques, give a framework that people can use in the moment, right? That being able to identify this is happening, let me give meaning making first. Let me go into a space of meaning making. Let me stop here before I make a decision. Let me stop here before I tell the other party what I really think about them, right? Because once it's out, you're going to have an impact. And the question is this the impact I want to have? As an elected official, I had to be happened there many, many times during public comments, listening to things that were their perceptions, but not more really grounded in facts. But to them, the emotions were running high. So for first and foremost, empathize with the other person, because this other person is sensing, it is sensing that they are losing something, they are paying a price that shouldn't be paid. That is real to them. But also remember that I had to stay in the space of making, to not react. If you say something, make sure that it has the intended impact. So being intentional, it gives you the ability to be intentional in the way you choose your words, in the way you act.
Now, how do we Inception mindset ourselves? There is the survey, which we'll include in the description for everyone to go and take. But how can we Inception mindset ourselves and also potentially our coworkers, our organization, to help build better results?
It always start with one person, right? And that's always been my approach, that I don't need everyone to do it. I need just a good number of people to start embracing this concept of Inception mindset, and then it becomes a little viral, right? And then they can teach it to someone else and bring it into their organization. As I said, it is important that we're going to start reframing what complexity is. Oftentimes, my concern are always been that when we say, but it's complex, it also triggers a cognitive bias. That means I cannot do anything about it because it's complex. You don't understand. It's complex, therefore I cannot do anything about it. Wrong. You have to experiment something in that complex space. You got to try something. You cannot just stay inactive in waiting for things to go back the way they were. After the Great Recession of 2008, 9, and so on, I heard many people saying, we are waiting for things to go back the way they were. I'm like, how did you figure it out that after this event of major magnitude, things are going to go back the way they were? They're going to evolve. There's going to be, that's the lack of Inception mindset. No, this has created other things.
Yeah.
And they are forming out there on the horizon. I need to start seeing them. So really, the first step is reframing our relationship with complexity. And the first thing you have to do, curiosity. I was up in Wyoming in October, and we were walking the University of Wyoming campus, which, by the way, is phenomenal. I was totally impressed with their facility and the layout. And there were banners out. And one said, the world needs more radical curiosity. I was like, great. I couldn't have said it better, right? I took a picture of the banner. I have it in my slides now. And it's really curiosity. What is coming down, right? It's really understand it as little pieces that maybe they don't have any value now, but they may have. Let me bring it on my radar. Let me have the bigger view. We will never have the full picture. This idea, let's wait until we have the full pictures, it's an illusion. We can open the aperture and see the bigger picture. But waiting to take action because you don't have the full picture, it reminds me the words of the late General Colin Powell. They said, you have to take action when you have 60% of the information. With less, you increase risk. If you wait for more, right, you lose competitive advantage. And I wish he would still be around to ask him, but General Powell, how do you know you have 60%, right? Because I'm still trying to figure it out. So he basically saying what he just translated, and after I reflected, you never have the full picture. You will have the bigger picture, get as much as you can, take actions, right? And so that is really important, that the way we embrace complexity with curiosity. That's one aspect. Number two is the work that we have to do in ourselves. Developing our brand doesn't mean what jacket I'm going to wear, what watch I'm going to put on, right? That is the packaging. The leadership branding, this idea of personal branding came into my awareness some 20 years ago. And there was a consumer electronic company that we were working with, and they had made at the time a tremendous impact in the DVD player in the industry or segment of consumer electronics. And good, bad, or indifferent, what they may have done to the product, it's all up for debate still to this day. But one of their director of marketing, we were having lunch, and he says, what about this? What about if we create a Radi design brand? He says, it's really about branding yourself, right? And you're gonna design, we're gonna produce it, we're gonna sell it under Radi design, right? Like Porsche design or Pininfarina. Like, oh. And he started talking to me about personal branding, which was from Tom Peters. I never heard about it, And he really captured my attention. But then as I went into more leadership study, my PhD, I said, wait a second, this something missing here. Is not personal branding, is leadership branding. You got to brand yourself as a leader. And so I started doing some research on what is really constitute a brand for a leader, right? What does it really mean to have a leadership brand profile? And I identify 9 dimensions of it. Trustworthiness. So your next guest will talk about trust, right? So are you trustworthy as a leader? What about your performance as a leader? What about the sense of satisfaction that others have with you, right? No, all satisfaction, but how do they experience you? Are you eliciting loyalties from others? Are you approachable? Are you mindful? Are you authentic? And what about your perspectives, right? So those 9 dimensions creates your leadership brand profile. And so we have to work on it. We have to work on all, we cannot pick one or the other. We have to work on all 9 dimensions. So there's personal development that needs to be taken into account. The third one to develop a Inception Mindset is to really look at the organization. Do we have clarity in our organization? Do we have strategic clarity? Do we have execution clarity? Do we have operational clarity, right? Why is this money being taken from this division and give it to the other? Because oftentimes it happens. That's an example. Money from a budget is moved from this division to that division without really explanation why they need the money. Yeah, but what about us that we are being shortchanged? What is our game plan, right? How are we gonna form without that? And so oftentimes there's no clarity. So clarity or lack of clarity is really it really demotivates people, right? And then you don't have commitment from them anymore. You're mere compliance. So the more you create clarity, then the fourth one will be to bring it all together. How can I innovate here? How can I bring in elements? How can I perhaps facilitate someone to grow in their position that may be reluctant in the moment? How can I support them? And so it becomes really this ability to bring all 3 together, to have a sense of innovation, to be able to say, look, we don't have the money now to move on this idea, Jacob, but let's put together an effort to incubate what you are proposing right now. And set up an incubator that is not where good ideas go to die, but it's a methodology that I offer in my book to really put together an incubation process that really moves you, that at the very least, even if you decide not to proceed, you had organizational learning that emerged from it. So these are the components in a nutshell, simmering down 200 and some 50 pages into this nutshell of how we ought to develop an Inception Mindset.
I want to talk about your plans for your work going forward, the retreats, I'll call them, or however you like to call them. But I'd also did understand as well one or a few or a set of major success stories that you've seen with organizations and how they were able to come to the levels of awareness that they needed to create change. Are there specific ones with the integral advantage that were most impactful that would be good memoirs for people to keep in their mind as they go ahead and, maybe buy the book, do the test, things like that, approach their lives in a way?
So, for us, we have to count on what is called self-reporting, right? When we go in, work with an organization, offer, for example, a seminar, right? Sometimes I have a seminar, is one day about trusted empowerment. Then there is a follow-up that I do with usually the point of contact to see how things are being moving on. What have you implemented or what you are committed that day? It's not to hold them accountable, it's to really kind of check in with them. I call it a check-in. And in this past April of 2024, I did one of those seminars, and I was about to follow up with the point of contact. And here comes the email. Like I said, I'm going to follow up with the point of contact next week. And on a Friday, here comes an email with actually a full report of how they were using the what we have, the work product that we have created. And that to me was really how, first of all, I have to say with this group, and I cannot disclose the name, it's a federal agency, but I am always amazed about the cognitive prowess of this group. There are 50 people that I did 3 or 4 of these workshops already, and they're in. Talk about radical curiosity. Whatever I bring in, they look at it, they tear it apart, they object, they accept, yes, but this could be that. So there's really that willingness to engage. So right there, when that happens, right, Jacob, that something is happening, right? If it's just a linear me talking and them saying nothing, I fail. I already know, oh boy, I'm on the wrong track here. So, but then to show me themselves without even being prompted, I thought it was really interesting that they show me how they actually were getting results out of the work product they created, because I facilitated with the concept. I brought the concept, they brought the context. And so we facilitated what they created there. And then they basically made a commitment, because Jacob, whenever somebody is part of building something, they want to see it coming to fruition. One of the dangers in organization we see is that when the executive team goes off for a retreat, it comes back with the new rules, right? And nobody maybe had enough input there. And now this is disseminated as the strategic plan, right? Strategic plan. And then it goes on the shelves for 5 years and nobody even remembers what that was all about, right? Strategic planning is, I talk a lot about strategy and less about strategic planning. But that's really one of the stories that I have found, that we are really affecting, having an impact of how then organization use these concepts in implementation. Because oftentimes what we see is that people try to apply. Here I come with a concept, apply it. Application is linear in nature. For example, if I come to you, I know you have a tremendous financial background, and I could maybe I haven't done much financial management. I used to teach at the Benedictine University, international finance and economics. But let's say I need a refresh on Excel. You can drive me through, right? And train me to be better at Excel. And I can measure the results. You tell me, hey, these are the formulas, this and that. And it's linear. It's a training. Leadership is more about implementation. It's not training, it's development. I really don't like the term leadership training, because it implies there is a linear methodology that you go through the step and you're a leader. The leadership is developed when you are able to take all these concepts and create your dashboard, as in the cockpit of an airplane, to navigate the context in which you operate. And so one of the things I always say to participants, if I ever give you the impression that I pretend to know more about your context than you do, feel free to throw anything you have at me. Please don't throw anything at the face, but if you have a rotten tomato, I deserve it, because I don't. I must have the humility to listen to them and listen to multiple data points to understand their context. Then I can offer them the content and how to implement that content.
That brings up to me the constructivist.
Yes.
The constructivism.
Yeah.
Isn't that organization where there's a high willingness to engage and they're tearing apart the materials and diving in and trying to learn more? There's constructing that is occurring within the mind rather than training can often be passive. You take enough notes, and then they go and sit there. I actually find that, and one thing I'm trying to stop doing is writing so much. In general notes, because I used to watch my mom on phone calls and she would always just write notes, and it's a good habit.
Yeah.
But what I'll find is that I'll accumulate this stack of notes, and then it doesn't really resonate or hit until I take that stack of notes and I go to my computer and I go through one by one and I figure out, where does this go? Where does this fit? Why is this important? And then it comes down all the way down to one or two things that I needed to do. But it is it's the process of the writing, and that forms the constructing, but you don't need to actually take the note. You really don't. If you're actively engaged in your mind and you're, again, constructing that knowledge, and you're sharing that among your organization and you're willing to use it, you're going to get good results. And I think, we also have a lot of dependence in again, the world and the internet and everything we say that we hear is so focused on, you just need to do more work. You just need to do more work. And there's so much value in that. It's true. But if you're not constructing new ideas and overcoming different hurdles or looking at them in different ways and being willing to engage in these kind of conversations, you're probably going to get stunted along the way, right? Or
I agree with you, Jacob. One of the important part is that we have to be able to map things, right? Because a very dense document full of text is really not easy for us to stay connected with. So, I encourage the participants to, even in the participant handbook that we give, there's a lot of mapping opportunity there. I give them a little bit of a framework for them to map things out, because then there's ownership. They better connect. They map it the way they see it. I always ask individuals in my course at the beginning, is there a right way to learn? And people say, no, yes. And I say, yes, there is a right way to learn. However you learn is the right way, there's the other way. And so some people are more visual and they need to map it out. Some people can remember text, but they still need to have a point of connections, right? Because they're used to massive amount of text. You have to meet people where they are in their development. And there's no one of the things that the biggest gift that I was given many years ago, I was 26 years old and I was a professor at Otis College of Art and Design. And during an exchange with a student, I believe, from what I was told, that I said that was a stupid question. I think the class was in the morning. In the afternoon, I received a fax, talking about dating myself, anonymously from a student saying that, kind of calling me out. And that was a great gift because I understood there are not stupid questions. There are low intensity questions or low impact questions, there are high impact questions. And sometimes you need someone to ask the low impact questions to progress to the questions that have the greatest impact. So thinking back, that was a gift that student, I still don't know who that student is, although I had a sense, given this person level of maturity in the early 20s, that college, 19. So, and I really thank that person still today for sending me the fax, right? I still had a fax machine. Here comes the fax, calling me out, Professor, da-da-da-da. I'm like, that was a point of there for me to, at 26, to be told, there's no such a thing as a stupid question. And truly, I developed this philosophy. There is low impact question, and then you can use those by asking a question back to escalate them into a high impact question.
Right. And two relevant points come up here. One is the way that, lawyers approach question and a case. You have to ask that. So you weren't in Canada
Yep.
on the 27th. No, I was not in Canada. Okay, right. And through that, you're building, just like the question I asked earlier about your experience in psychology, because what you're doing is when you say yes, you've now formed a basis of understanding and trust and respect that someone, when they're listening to this, can go, yes, he has experience with this. He did this. He practiced this, and it was applied, right? It's that readiness factor that, opens up people's minds. So that's one element that sometimes those low impact questions are building that basis of receptivity. The other one is, and you mentioned neurolinguistic programming. This is a key element of it is the sometimes seemingly low impact questions that are really uncovering the unconscious factors of a particular action or outcome or goal. The legendary example from neurolinguistic programming of you mentioned a federal agency, but I think it was the Army's pistol training. You ever heard that story?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Someone I don't remember the details, but yeah, that's could be an example right there.
yeah, so it was I believe it was the 1990s or something
Yeah.
like that. It was Tony Robbins and Richard Bandler. And, the pistol training certification or the marksman average score was anywhere from, I think it was like 45%. And so, but in the original stages of its development, it was better, right? And
Yeah.
so everyone was curious, like, actually few people were curious, unfortunately, but there was a set of curious people who said, what is going on here? I mean, this is unacceptable. We can't just have 45% marksman competency here. And what they ended up doing is they ended up going to the ones who were extremely good at it and asking them very simple questions like, what actually are you thinking at the moment when you're shooting?
Yeah.
Well, how are you breathing? How are you thinking about your hand, your finger, the pulling the trigger, your exhale? And it was through all of these small questions, which didn't really seem to be important, that they unearthed the unconscious factors that built up the effectiveness. And now today, the training over the last 25 years or so has been 95% from the 45%. So sometimes, yeah, those low leverage questions can add up into the right fabric. So
that's a great example. I remember more or less I didn't remember in the detail you explained it, which is great. And I was thinking about my time in the military when I was at a shooting range and my captain was standing up right there. I was laying down shooting. It was giving me basically a point by point of what I was doing, and he freaked me out. I mean, it's like too much. Let me try this. Oh, this one went there. This one went there. I'm like, it's like was a little bit too much attention, right? In the moment feedback that really threw me off even more. But I did a decent job. This is to say that there's a moment for everything, right? And we have to, in leadership, you have to recognize leaders are not only those that envision the future and make it happen, right? There's truth to that. The visionary a leader must have vision, right? You cannot move an organization forward if you don't have vision. But at the same time, you got to bring people along. And so oftentimes, that's what effectiveness is. You can be efficient, go toward a vision, and lose 50% of the people that help you move the organization. And that's not positive either. You lose a lot of institutional knowledge, skills that were important to create the value that now you're trying to scale for the consumer or your clients, and you lost the people that were helping to create that value. So you're scaling business, but the value proposition has declined, right? So you got to have, after all, where does the word leadership finds its roots? And it finds its roots in an Indo-European word, lead. Lead means to cross a threshold. So you have to bring people along with us. You have to do what we have to do in an ethical manner to invite people to cross the threshold with us Furthermore, the word lit, if you want to go into the philosophy of the word, means also to cross a threshold or die. Not necessarily of a physical death, but it means that the detriment of staying on this side of the threshold are more than if we cross the threshold into the unknown. And so we have to look at that door where the threshold is and look at the point of inception across the door to tell people, come with me. And we have to paint a picture that is not a mirage, right? It's not a mirage. We have to paint a plausible picture of the future, what we're going to find when we cross the threshold.
Wonderful things. Let's talk a little bit about these centers. Maybe that's a better word, not retreat, centers.
Yes,
Now
centers.
they call the Vipassana center. That's what they call it. But let's talk about your centers, your plans, and help some of the listeners understand how they could potentially participate in that, or what's that be like. Right? You just talked about leading through this threshold. Lead us through what this potential future could look like.
Exactly. And that is an example of a vision, but also is even a bit more there is my sense of purpose. My sense of purpose is to have the greatest impact on the greatest number of stakeholders at the best of my ability. At the best of my ability. I mean, one of the things that I believe that will come out of all this effort, Integral Advantage now delivers courses and seminar and workshop on Zoom after as the pandemic was rolling out, that became a delivery platform for many organizations. Or we go to a location that we have some selected locations here in California and elsewhere that we have good relationship that we can host the seminar, or we go to the client site. And more often than not these days, you see more and more them wanting to use their facility. However, I think there's also the options where we ought to have a location that is ours, right? And so the idea came to establish the first one will be in Montana. I own personally 40 acres there in a beautiful location, and we have been incrementally and step by step, right, putting in the infrastructure. We have a road, we have water, we have power, all that, right? And eventually that will become a center where we can work with my vision is 12 people at a time. I love the number 12, and truly from different organizations to offer them an opportunity to do a developmental experience, a learning event, a learning experience that integrates a few things that has to be holistic, the self, the surrounding, and really be able to unplug from where you are in the daily things and really be able to bring it into the space, bring all of it, but then unpack it in a meaningful way, that you walk away with learning, but contextualized learning that you can bring back into your organization. So an executive center, if you wish, there. And the other is potentially to have these centers in distinct locations or destinations where then they are close, they are secondary markets, so the costs are a little bit decreased than downtown Manhattan, right? Do something like that in Manhattan, but they are accessible from primary markets. So in Montana is easily accessible from Seattle, Salt Lake City, another Portland. And so it's really accessible from that point of view. And the other one will be in Wyoming, which is in between Laramie and Cheyenne, which is very accessible from Denver. So it is an international airport and all. So this idea to have these centers in what they are secondary market for the purpose of slowing it down, right? Get yourself out, not the Las Vegas market, the LA market. Get out of this market, bring yourself into a different space that we will curate, and then go through a learning experience with others, right? This is really comes from Pepperdine University has done tremendous job with their facility in Malibu. Thank God they survive. And our prayers and thoughts goes out with all the people that have been impacted, including family, who I consider family members. But the idea of George Grazzadio, who is the namesake of the School of Business at Pepperdine, was really to have this facility where executives could go and learn from each other and really build learning community that were meaningful. And so this is a way to access primary market through secondary locations that have meaning, right? You have something around in Montana. We have the beautiful views of the Flathead Lake. We have access to the Flathead Lake. We have the Mission Mountains. It's really bring us back to our humanity and start there. Just unplug to, in the words of James White, who used to be the chairman and CEO of Jamba Juice, and now I believe he's the chairman of the Honest Company. One time said, "I believe in slowing down to speed up," and that that also a lot of impact, because indeed you got to slow down in a moment and really in order to really get real speed, not the illusion of speed. So sometimes you got to unplug.
Right, and at the root level, the word clarity comes back into play here because, I definitely experienced, and I think one thing we can leave people with here is when you really look at, or when you get the fundamental competencies in place, you'd be really surprised at how little actual action needs to be done to achieve something that can drastically improve your life or, set yourself up in a really good way. So, people like Zuckerberg, who in the matter of a weekend programmed what was Facebook. He just had, right? If you could look at it and say an immense short period of time, which resulted in, where he had this clarity, resulted in the wonderful thing he has today. Or if we look at a lot of, deals in the finance space, investments and what have you, you have a set of maybe 8 to 10 calls. Maybe you go out and visit in person and do things like that. But it's like really this very small set of things. And, and then you can go achieve 6 figures of income or 7 figures or 8 or whatever from a deal, and or from a creation or from an IP that you make. And so I think it's really important for people to know because there is a lot of work that goes into the fundamental competencies. So don't get me wrong. That self-development, a lot of times later in your career, it's about clarity. It's about just knowing that, I dived deeper and I figured out that I was focusing on this set of 8 things that I just really need to focus on this one. If I get this one to the right level, everything else is going to go better, and you need to step away and slow down to figure that out sometimes.
And it is true to the ability that still technical skills, expertise, etc. Like the core competency have to be developed continuously. I was talking with a friend who happened to, I didn't know, but he retires as a lawyer. And I was asking him some advice, like, you know what, I've been out long enough to know that I don't know the answer. 5 years ago, yeah, you're right. I was the expert in that field. Today, I cannot consider myself the expert. So I will not tell you what I think about this. In this, stay relevant, stay at pace with what's going on in our specific industries, how we deliver the value that we intend to deliver. That also takes the continuous development of in never think enough. When I started, I often joke that I started my business at age 22 because there was nothing else I needed to learn. That's not really true. The reality is that at the time, the United States was still recovering from the 1990s recession, if you will remember. Young for your time, probably not. But the reality is that it was really hard to land a job. And so when you're not invited to play in somebody else's sandbox, you better start building your own. And that's why, the need is need is the mother of all inventions or innovation. Yeah, that's some truth to that, right?
Most definitely. So how can people engage with you? For those that are sufficiently moved from a personal level, for a business level, how could they reach out and engage with what you're doing and your vision?
The best way for them is to reach out through our website, integraladvantage.com. There is a little form they can fill up to contact us, and it will be routed to me, and just put in some comments what they're looking for. LinkedIn is a great place to stay in contact with me. So you can there's not, unfortunately enough, there are not that many Robert Radi. So if you search me up in LinkedIn, Robert Radi, and it's also part of my handle is /IN/Robert Radi. So I was the one early enough on LinkedIn to capture that. So those are the two good ways, solid ways to reach me.
Great. Well, Dr. Robert, I appreciate you being on the podcast. We'll include links to all those things below. Next time we do this, you can come out here to Minnesota, and I'm going to have a studio up here. So
I would love to. Absolutely. I want to thank you for the invitation again, for your very, the questions, the way you conducted made me think more than maybe I made you think. So thank you for that. It's been a pleasure, and I'm very much appreciative of what you're doing with your podcast. I think that having watched some of the other episodes, you really are living with your purpose, and you are really creating values for others. So I hope that my contribution has created a little bit more value for you and for your listeners.
most certainly. Thank you, Dr. Robert, for all of that. Go ahead and check out Dr. Robert and the Integral Advantage. Subscribe to this content, and we'll be back for episode 38 coming up next.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching this episode of Titans Up today. What did you learn from it? Make sure to drop a comment below with your most valuable insight so that other people can engage in the conversation around what this speaker brought to the table. And then on another front, make sure to subscribe so that every time we drop a new episode, you will be notified. And that way you can keep fueling your dreams and your brain with fresh insights, which can help you along your journey and along your path to your goals. So thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.